This is episode 156 of DadAwesome, and today I have my lead pastor, Pastor Peter Haas, joining us for the second part of a three-part series. So we're going long-form interview, but I'm breaking them down into about 25 minutes each. And today we're going to go deeper into rapid fire. I surveyed about 50 dads, and I said, what are some of the most important questions, the most helpful things that you would love to learn about fatherhood? So we're going to go after topics like sex, like dating, like scheduling, and what's most important. We're going to go after technology and screens and so many other helpful areas of fatherhood. So buckle up, take some notes. We're both on YouTube and on all the podcast apps. You can look in the show notes. We've got actually transcripts of this conversation as well if you want to speed read instead of listen. But I'm excited and I'm thankful that you're joining us. Again, last week's conversation was the setup, so you can go back and listen to that. But today is part 2 with my pastor, Pastor Peter Haas. And I know the principle, less is more, pruning the calendar. It's just passing that. You mentioned that was one of the most valuable things that you can teach is the principle of margin, and you can't have and do it all. Talk a little bit more on that theme.
Well, yes. Everyone is vying for your kids' time, and the goal is not to occupy their time, it's to occupy their hearts.
Yeah.
And because those 2,000 hours take so much time, it's kind of like you and I've talked about before. It takes an hour of video game time to have 10 minutes of good parenting time. It takes 40 minutes of YouTube uselessness in order to have that 15 minutes of golden parenting. And it might be Minecraft for you. It might be, it might be a sport for you. But there's that trade-off of I have to waste this much time in order to have that golden parenting time. And so if you think about that, because your kids are not going to open up about what happened to them at school, unless your kids happen to be very extroverted. They're not going to open up to you about their drama at school. And then you're like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how do you respond to an irritating classmate? How do we love on the teacher who isn't giving you a fair shake? And what do you think is going on with that teacher? And what do you think you're doing that is actually causing that teacher to, like a lot of parents, they just, they're not realizing that takes a little while. And so to get into that conversation and then to process that, and then sometimes as a parent, I didn't know how to process that well. And so I need to come back to them the next night. And so it's almost like having those kind of windows of time, be it at dinner time. My wife and I were always looking for those less is more. We actually told our kids, this is going to sound funny, but we encouraged our kids to actually say no to as many sport opportunities and as many extracurriculars as possible, because if it took away from time with us, and we knew that our lives were chaotic enough that our kids, we had a lot of parents, a lot of our friends thought we were almost abusing our kids by not giving them opportunities.
Limiting, yeah.
And we heard that a lot, which sounds really kind of funny. Like, I can't believe you're not allowing your kid to go out for this sport. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I can't believe that you're allowing your kid to, you're losing the golden window to unless you're coaching your kid's sports or you're there and it's the drive time, actually. I think a lot of parents will mentor their kids through the drive times, the mom taxi times. Sure. But for us, it was like, no, I don't want to have to break up our family dinners, or I would rather my kids be around the house a little bored and then we do a hobby together than for them to be gone every single day.
And if it is 90% logged shared interest, 10%, maybe it's 97%, 3%, who knows what the ratio is based on age and receptiveness. But you said going after their heart. That's what you're going after, is you're going after their heart. Finding those, I know some of us listening we don't have with each of our kids that shared interest yet. And I love your story about your dad was willing to build a half pipe skateboard bike ramp in your backyard, like a classic example of like way outside his comfort area. Not only is he letting his son risk it all, but also building this project together. What's some of your coaching around helping us figure out and try out different shared interest hobbies with our kids?
Well, think about your kids. They're not mature enough to find common interest with you.
Sure.
It's kind of like when I'll say it this way. I always felt like a baby owner when my kids were under 7. That first year is more like mom's golden window. But once your kids get to that 2, 3, all of a sudden dad becomes the most important figure. And it's not about the nurture. It's about just logging hours with dad. Well, for example, I hated watching kids' movies and, oh my gosh, kids' music drives me crazy. But as a dad, I was always trying to figure out, well, what can my kids relate to? And of course, I was never a video gamer, but it happened to be the common interest that my kids loved watching me play certain video games. And so they would it was almost like a family event with my 2 oldest daughters. Or, and again, their attention span may only last 15 minutes. And so it was always evolving. And I had to be flexible enough of what are my kids doing that I could tolerate doing. And a lot of times that Minecraft is the new Legos, right? So I would Minecraft with them.
Sure.
I would always have to learn some sort of new game, which was irritating at first, or we'd watch a TV show together, a YouTuber together. It was like our nightly ritual of, hey, so-and-so released a new YouTube. And so then I would get into their world and I would process it with them. And sometimes it was shooting hoops. Sometimes it was playing catch. Sometimes it was making duct tape wallets.
Amazing.
Other times, you know what I mean? Like sitting down with them doing crafts or to be honest, there's a lot of hobbies that I only learned for them.
Yep.
And it was very, very temporary. But at any given moment, I always wanted to try to have at least 2 common interests. And it might be a TV show, it might be a book, it might be but just anything. My job is to initiate.
That's it. And I want to make sure we don't miss that. We cannot expect our kids to initiate finding shared interests. It's so easy because our kids at a certain age, they want to be with us all the time. But the actual process of exploring what's something that we can grow together and learn together and really share that opens up the opportunities to connect with the heart.
Totally. Which is why I was never really anti-technology. Technology was actually my hobby tool.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, like even with video games, we had a rule that you have to play video games with other people. It's a social thing.
Yeah.
And so it's me and my son conquering something together, and then we're troubleshooting. We played Lego Batman, and then it was irritating for me. But actually, in the process, I'd be like, he would get really frustrated with me, and then we'd fight, and then it was actually the fighting that was positive.
Yeah.
I wanted my daughters to fight with each other about, hey, you're not cooperating. And then we'd stop the video game and then we'd be like, what's going on here? Let's talk about this. Why are you like, me explaining to my son, when you talk to me that way, I don't want to be your friend. And your friends are just going to do this, but I'm frustrated because you're not being cooperative. And then, the video game actually became the crisis that would create the coaching moment.
Yeah, you've created a laboratory that allows you to hit pause and then get into that conversation. There's some other areas you can't always hit pause in. I love that you talk about fighting can be a good thing. You talked earlier about whining and how the whining cycle, actually, we should expect it. We shouldn't freak out. But coach me a little bit further around looking for those teachable moments like the fight or like the whining and how I can kind of keep a perspective of taking advantage of that moment to grow my kids.
Yeah, well, here's the truth, okay? You're not always going to be, life is not about being perfect. It's about it's fumbling towards this process of self-analysis. I'll say it this way. Me logging hours with my kids, processing, hey, how you talked to your mom there was not good. I'm going to pull you aside and sit with you in your bedroom, and I'm going to talk to you about this. Let's just engage feelings and emotions. I think a lot of parents, they think about how disciplining your kids. Okay, think about it like when your kids are little and in a high chair. Disciplining your kids when they're all set up for a meal is actually irritating for you as a parent to clean them up, pull them into the bathroom. Hey, you can't throw your food on the floor. It's actually, a lot of times as a parent, I'm like, I'm tired. I don't even want to do this.
Right.
I'm just going to ignore it.
Take a pass. Yep.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the moment. It's actually, I think, a laziness in us to seize those moments. And yet if we don't help our kids process their own emotions, you think about emotional intelligence, it's helping our kids understand what emotion are you feeling, how do you control this emotion, what does dad do, okay? And so a lot of times it was like, you just witnessed your mom and I fighting, and I'm going to go apologize to your mom right now. And I'm apologizing to you as well, but I'm going to go apologize to your mom, and I want you to pray for your mom and I. You know, like welcoming them into the tension. Yeah. It's like, I know I'm going to blow it as a dad, but I'm just going to welcome them into that. And same thing true with you just fought with your sister. So now this is what I want you to do is I want you to demonstrate generosity. I want you to share with them, or I want you to, you know, those types of things. Yeah. Your life happens in the margins, and the less margin you have, the less time you have for those relationships. And so
the fumbling forward, and that if there is the margin, you can have grace to take it, make it a teachable moment, because we are fumbling. We certainly are fumbling forward. Let's talk about where you've missed it. A time where you missed it, you brought either pain, direct pain, or you just, man, in hindsight, I really missed it there. Either it could be in the teenage years or even back to when they were younger, or maybe a story of each. Can you share about how you have been not so dad awesome?
Oh my gosh, like every day.
Yeah, exactly.
Every day. Well, you know, I remember messing. We try to pull our kids into even the fights, and I want my kids to understand that intimacy is forged through conflict. That fighting is actually a part of the health, and so when we would fight it out, we would hug it out, and I wanted them to know that it's not about being perfect, but it is about quick apologizing. Yeah. It is about me owning it. I wanted my kids to know, hey, here's a principle. If I even think I'm only 10% wrong and they're 90% wrong, I'm going to own it like it's 100% my fault. Yeah. And so I'm going to demonstrate apologizing to them. And so there were numerous times where I got into a fight with my kids where I believe I'm 80% right. Yep. And I want them to understand me, but they're not going to understand me until I seek first to understand them. Yep. And so I have to go into their room and model it. Hey, dad missed it there. My tone was not correct. I should have, like in my head, I'm thinking, you're 80% wrong, but I'm going to own it like I'm 100%. And I'm going to disarm them, seek to understand, and then it becomes the moment. It's almost like the first person who feels understood. If I can do that, demonstrate that, then they're going to ask me the questions. Yeah. Well, just demonstrating. One of my goals was I wanted them to see that their dad was filled with the fruit of the Holy Spirit. When they're older, I wanted them to look back and say, hey, my dad really made it his goal to be filled with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And even when he wasn't, he apologized for it. I want them to remember that. I want that to be the number one thing they remember about me. Yeah. Which sounds funny. I don't want it to be my dad showed up at my games. That to be honest, I want them to actually say when he couldn't, he apologized for it, or when he couldn't. Like, I want them to think of me. Some of those typical metrics, people don't sit back and think, oh, my parents exposed me to all of these opportunities. It was, no, they were there for me. They were emotionally present.
Now, I know the topic of pain. I mean, you wrote a whole book on it, right? Broken escalators, all right?
Right.
When there's a delay, like these are real. This is real for us as dads, that we are hitting points where in fact, most of us have been seriously inconvenienced or there's been real pain that's been inserted these last 9 months with COVID. But I had a chance to watch you walk through not only a pandemic that shut down physical church, but and altered how we did things as a staff here at our church. I watched you walk through a neck injury. At the same exact time, I watched you walk through a city in great pain with all the racial tensions and just the horrible, just heartbreak that happened in our city. And then into, just it feels like wave after wave. And again, everyone's had it worse than we have, and everyone's, in some ways, we can all compare all day long. But walking through pain as a dad, I'm sure, our kids see how we walk through pain and how we walk through delays. Would you coach me a little bit on how you have even approached this last 9 months to keep fatherhood as one of those glass balls as a priority? Because it feels like everything's chaos, right?
Yeah.
And just any even moments of, I learned a new thing about dad life in this season of pain.
Yeah, honestly, it was be present in the pain. You don't have to have the solutions and all the answers to it. And a lot of times my kids would come to me, especially as they get older, they come with more and more increasingly complex questions.
Yeah.
And they'll stump you a lot more than they did when they were younger. And a lot of discipleship, it has nothing to do with your Bible knowledge, but it has everything to do with being present and inviting them to go on a journey with you. I don't know the answer to that scripture verse question, but let's actually research it together. And a lot of times it was, I don't know why that person treated you so terribly and shamed you on social media over that issue. I don't, but here's just being present in the pain. I've noticed that my kids don't need me to have all the answers, but they do need me to be emotionally capable of helping them find God in the midst of that. Yeah. And I've noticed that the greatest disciplers aren't the ones with all the Bible answers. They're the ones that are just willing to be present and go on a journey with you. Let's find out together, the ones that put their arm around your shoulder and walk with you. And I think that even in this season, I've been able to do that with so many people, and they have an absence of people who are present. And in some ways, just being with my kids is good parenting. Yeah. It's just showing up. And I think a lot of parents, they think they have to be some sort of Bible expert or this. They think it's all about expertise, when in reality it's just about being present to help them find the expert.
Yep.
And the other thing I think in this pandemic is teaching my kids to get off social media, get off the news. I think a lot of parents, one of the number one predictors of healthy parents is the stress level of the parent. And in other words, it's not even the two of the top three. Well, the number one is how much time you spend with your kids. The number two is how much stress you experience. And the number three is the quality of the relationship you have with your spouse. In other words, two of the top three are indirect things that aren't even directly related to your kids. It's not even something you're doing to your kids.
Right.
And if you think about that, me having a relationship with the Lord and me not being anxious all the time, me teaching my kids, the world is crazy. Sometimes you have to disconnect from the world and you have to connect with God, and let's do that together. How about we listen to a sermon podcast together tonight instead of having the news on? Or, things like that. Processing. I had to be present with my kids throughout this entire election. And I didn't tell my kids who to vote for, but we processed all of the issues. Yeah. How would a person go about voting? And, you're able to kind of indirectly parent your kids, because a lot of times my kids don't want to hear me rant.
Sure.
about politics. They want to hear me wrestle with it. And so just being me being present to call my daughter, because she's in another state throughout a lot of this. And so I had to call her a lot to be present. And then my other kids, just hanging out with them more and logging hours with them more, just to be just to make sure that they're emotionally sane.
Yeah.
But I've had more conversations with my kids this year, and coming back to that golden window, if you spend the hours well during that time, it's actually been more throughout this pandemic. It's been my kids inviting their friends over and me mentoring their friends and their boyfriends and mentoring just all of those additional people who maybe don't have answers in this season. Me just being present. And of course, I don't have to have all the answers for them either, but they're texting me, what do you think about this, Pastor Peter?
I mean, you've mentioned earlier that mentors can even bypass you and go straight to speaking life and care for your kids. But then now you're mentioning that there's a sphere of influence that you have beyond your 3 kids.
Yep.
You mentioned boyfriends. You mentioned friend circle. Talk a little bit further. Coach me about how I can be intentional beyond the sphere of my direct kids.
Well, I mean, ultimately, if you think about those 2,000 conversations, you stay on it. You log an insane number through like father-daughter dates or father-son dates, or just keeping those sacred hours open. You log those hours. Eventually, my kids will be having conversations with friends, and they'll come to me with their friends' questions.
Sure.
And then I'll be like, well, why don't you invite them over? And then me logging out, because I'm the dad who plays Minecraft and I'm the dad who does fill in the blank. I end up being the dad who ends up having these conversations. And then I'll send these kids home saying, you need to ask your mom or your dad about this. And I'll send them home with assignments.
Interesting.
Almost.
So it's not because you're a dad who's a pastor or a preacher. In fact, it's probably be less so because of that. It's because you have a shared interest and hobby that almost makes it more accessible to bring in.
Oh, man. They would take their friends over, and then we'd all play Flappy Golf together, which is like an iPad game. And my whole thing is I want to be kind of am I interested in any of these things? No. I would much rather just be reading a book. The introvert in me, believe it or not, wants to just kind of do time. I just want to hang out with my wife. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to play Flappy Golf with my kids. But if that's what it takes to log a few, well, I also get to know, I want to know my kids as friends and find out, okay, this kid is probably not the best influence on that, and I get to find out what they bring out in my kids as well. And so kind of creating a home turf. We've never been fans of sleepovers because nothing good ever happens after 11 o'clock. But you know what I'm saying? Like we tried to have their friends over as much as possible just to even get to know them or be present with their kids on that type of turf. And so, after a while, and if you log enough of those, I didn't realize the reason why you log the hours in the golden window is so that when your kids do start dating at around 16, 17, you can spend that time mentoring their friends and their boyfriends. Actually, that's the goal, is if you do it right, most of your discipleship at 17, 18 will be with the friends of your kids. And that's kind of how you want to design it as a parent.
You're building for that next chapter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So late last night, I reached out and sent a text message to 50 dads in our church. And I said, what if you could ask Pastor Peter some fatherhood questions? Super fun way to just kind of cast it at. 80% of them responded. So I got 40 responses back with questions and areas or topics that they'd love to hear from you. So we'll go a little bit rapid fire here. And it's okay if we end up going deeper into a few of these. But one just interesting question that was posed is, a friend said, ask Pastor Peter, if you, what question do you wish more young dads asked you?
What question do I wish more young dads would ask me? Well, remember, parenting is the information, it gets painfully relevant depending on the age of your kids.
Sure.
And so a lot of times I wish people would just ask me, hey, what should I be focusing on in this season?
Yeah.
And a lot of times when your kids are young, it's more the busyness. It's more like focus on your marriage, because kids are so distracting that you tend to ignore your marriage until you start to empty nest. Now that I'm at that point where I'm launching my kids, I'm starting to see how valuable my marriage is and how easy it was to ignore when the kids were, when you're in that really busy season, which is when your kids are all young. Once your kids are all, it's almost like once your kids are in, once they can buckle themselves into their car seats and put themselves to bed, and they're all in school, you're kind of like, you start getting your life back again. And that really, so in some ways when your kids are really young, it's that before they're all in full day school is the busiest season of your life, and it's easiest to ignore your marriage there. So just people understanding what's the phase and what do I need to be focusing on in that phase.
Sure.
So
let's go back to the first phase. Another question here around you are always seeking mentorship, reading, talking to mentors, calling them. What questions, if you can put yourself back to the early dad phase, what questions were you asking your mentors in that phase? What types of questions were you asking them in that early dad years?
Well, what types of dating conversations should I be having with my kids before 13?
Sure.
What types of conversations do I need to be having with my kids after 13, between 13 and 16? What types of dating conversations do I need to be having? There are different building blocks. If you think about your kids like a house, and you have to start with the foundation, then you have to start roughing out the walls, then you start doing the finishing carpentry.
Sure.
There are certain milestones. A lot of people, they don't even start talking about dating until 16 when their kids start dating. And then they're way behind. You're like, oh, now I have to build a house in 3 months? And that's the problem, is that kids, I think, tend to catch you off guard. They don't talk about it. Or a lot of parents, they wait until the crisis happens, their kid gets suspended, and then they start talking about how to deal with tough friends. Well, now you're behind the 8 ball. Now you're trying to log 100 conversations. And that's usually what happens to a lot of parents. And so it's being on it. Like, what do I need to be doing now? So that way it's easier later.
For the later. Let's go to dating next, because many questions on the topic of dating advice, and it feels a long ways off, but it also feels not that far off for me with a 7-year-old. So talk about, and obviously it's a huge topic, but talk about some of your top wisdom, top advice, top learnings in the area of preparing, and then now your kids in dating relationships.
Well, before your kids are 13, it's taking them on one-on-one time. And before 13, I always wanted to make 4 things really, 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 really clear. When it comes to dating, mom, dad, and the family get to be a part of the choice. Okay? Dating is not a you do it. It's do they fit with the family values? And so, and you know what? If you coach your kids young enough in this, it won't feel oppressive when they're older. Now my daughter, when she brings a boyfriend home, she automatically asks her sister, what do you think of this person? Do you like them? Do they fit with our family? They seek out the advice. We also taught our kids so that's the first thing. It's a family decision. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be oppressive on these people, but I want them to be thinking that way. Number 2, it's, hey, you have a God-shaped hole in your heart that only God can fulfill. It's putting God first. No person will ever fulfill you, and you need to understand that. That's the second thing I wanted my kids to have clear. The third thing is, when it comes to the timing, don't date too soon. In other words, I let them know from the time they were little girls or little boys, hey, listen, dating before age 16 is dumb. It's just, I would always say it's like a frozen pizza, because they all like pizza. You wouldn't eat a pizza straight out of the freezer, right? You got to cook it. And eating, you got to cook the pizza. Well, it's not good until it's cooked. And dating before 16 is silly. Actually, dating before 18 is silly. And I would always, like when they were kids, I'd always be like, who would you have dated 5 years ago? And then they would always laugh and be like, gross, like that's so gross. I'm like, believe it or not, your opinion is going to change that dramatically. Every 5 years, your opinion is going to change that dramatically.
That's
right. And so you kind of brainwash them into you can't date. Like I always told my little girls, hey, I won't let you date until 16. I don't think you should date before 18. And of course, they all want to date by 15 or 14 because that's what everybody talks about.
Yeah.
It's what they see on TV. It's what everybody talks about in school. And so the more you brainwash your kids before they're 13, the more normal it will feel. And then of course, the fourth thing that I would always teach my kids when they're young is start having the sex talk younger. We waited too long with one of our girls. You don't want them learning from their friends. And it's a progressive conversation. And I know it's awkward, but you have to, as a parent, your job is to just jump right into awkward and make like if I want my son to be able to talk about masturbation. And I want to be the first guy to teach my son what it is, what porn is. I don't want them learning from their friends. I want them to know when that conversation with their friends comes up, this is how you shut it down. This is how it's getting into those conversations early. So
ballpark, what age for a son? What age for a son to have that conversation?
You know what? Nowadays, I actually think the younger, the funny thing is actually when you talk with your kids about sex when they're really, really young, it's less awkward. If you wait, then it becomes awkward. And to be honest, as soon as they can mentally comprehend it, like even just talking about how babies are made, it sounds
sooner.
In our culture, you got to coach more. We don't talk about it enough is my whole thing. And your kids won't even be able to mentally comprehend half of it, but you want them to know on this topic, you can always come to me.
Open.
And because when they start asking questions about, well, what about my friends who think that you can choose to be a boy or a girl? We believe that actually joy comes by allowing God to choose. And God did choose your gender. And talking about those things. Now, we don't condemn other people for not agreeing with us. As Christians, we believe this, but we, almost having kind of this grace-oriented, but I'm going to talk about it now. And so just kind of programming that into them, the sooner you have these conversations, the less awkward it will be when they start coming to you as a 14-year-old, but with more of a worldly opinion.
Thank you so much for joining us for episode 156 of DadAwesome. All the show notes, the conversation links, the action steps, the quotes are all at dadawesome.org/156. You can find all those notes. Hey, I want to encourage you guys, let's be sharing this resource. We're about to turn 3 years old as a podcast, as a ministry, and we're asking all of our listeners, all of the DadAwesome community to be sharing DadAwesome with other dads. You can simply text them, dadawesome.org. You can share on Facebook or Instagram, on your social stories. Just any step of spreading the news about this resource to other dads is so helpful. So thank you in advance for sharing this resource with others. Thanks for being an awesome dad. By listening today, by saying, I want to learn, I want to grow, I'm not done with moving forward in the dad life. It matters. Your kids say thank you. I want to say thank you. We're cheering for you guys, and we're praying that you'd add some life to the dad life this week.